I hid a $40,000 monthly salary from my son for 35 years. He thought I was barely surviving. He thought I was just another office worker struggling to pay rent. And I let him believe it. But when he invited me to meet his wife's parents at an exclusive restaurant downtown, I decided to play a dangerous game. I dressed like I was broke. I acted like I was desperate. And what they did to me that night, how they treated someone they thought had nothing, it exposed something so ugly that it tore their perfect family apart. And honestly, they earned every second of it. My name is Catherine. I'm 58 years old, and my son Daniel has no idea who his mother really is. To him, I've always been the woman who left for work before sunrise and returned after dark. The woman who cooked simple meals with whatever was on sale. The woman who wore the same winter coat for a decade. Just another face in the crowd. Nothing remarkable. Nothing worth asking about. And I never corrected that assumption. Never told him I was pulling in $40,000 every single month as a senior vice president at a global logistics firm. Never mentioned the 19 years I spent signing contracts worth millions, overseeing operations across 7 countries, making decisions that kept thousands of people employed. Why would I? Money was never something I needed to wear like a badge. I grew up believing that real strength lives quietly, that dignity doesn't need an audience. So I kept my truth locked away. I stayed in the same 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood for 23 years. I carried the same leather purse until the strap frayed beyond repair. I shopped at discount outlets and cooked every meal at home. I saved everything, invested carefully, and built wealth in absolute silence. Because real power doesn't announce itself. Real power watches. And I was watching very carefully when Daniel called me that Tuesday afternoon. His voice had that specific tone, the one that used to surface when he was 7 years old and had broken something valuable. Mom, I need to ask you something. It's important. Rebecca's parents are flying in from overseas. First time visiting. They really want to meet you. We're doing dinner Saturday night at Marchand's. Please say you'll come. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. This wasn't a son excited to introduce his mother. This was a man worried about being embarrassed. Worried about appearances. Worried about fitting into someone else's expectations. I kept my voice calm. Do they know anything about me? The pause that followed told me everything. Then he stumbled through his answer. I mentioned you work in an office. That you live alone. That you're pretty simple. That you don't really have much. There it was. Simple. Like my entire existence could be reduced to that one crushing word. Like I was a problem he needed to apologize for in advance. I took a long, slow breath. All right, Daniel. I'll be there. Saturday night. I hung up and looked around my living room. Comfortable furniture worn smooth by decades of use. Walls bare of expensive art. A small television gathering dust. Nothing that would impress anyone from the world Daniel had married into. And right then, I made my decision. If my son thought I was poor, if his wife's family was coming ready to measure and judge, then I'd give them exactly what they expected to see. I'd show up looking desperate, defeated, barely holding on. I wanted to feel with my own hands how they'd treat someone who appeared to have nothing. I wanted to see their masks slip. Because I had a suspicion, a gut instinct sharpened by 40 years of reading people in boardrooms. I suspected Rebecca's family was the type who measured human worth in dollar signs. And my instincts had never been wrong. Saturday arrived under gray skies. I pulled out the worst outfit I owned from the back of my closet. A shapeless beige dress that looked like it came from a thrift store clearance rack, wrinkled and faded from too many washes. Scuffed brown shoes with worn-down heels. No jewelry, not even a cheap watch. I grabbed a fraying canvas bag, the kind you get free at grocery stores, and pulled my hair into a careless ponytail with graying strands falling loose around my face. I studied myself in the mirror. I looked like a woman life had chewed up and spit out. Forgettable. Invisible. Perfect. I called a cab and gave the driver an address in the wealthiest district in the city. Marchand's. The kind of restaurant where menus don't list prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford to eat there. The kind of place where a single meal costs what most people spend on groceries in a month. As we drove through streets that grew progressively cleaner and more polished, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like anticipation mixed with sadness. Part of me wanted to be wrong. Part of me hoped they'd look past the costume and treat me with basic human decency. But the other part, The part that had spent decades navigating corporate sharks and reading people's true intentions beneath polished surfaces. That part knew exactly what was waiting for me. The cab pulled up in front of floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with warm light. A doorman in white gloves stood at attention. Well-dressed couples drifted through the entrance like they belonged to a different species. I paid the driver, stepped onto the sidewalk, and walked through those doors into another world. Daniel was standing near a long table by the windows. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked nervous, checking his phone every few seconds. Beside him stood Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, wrapped in an elegant cream dress with gold threading, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. She looked flawless as always, but she wasn't smiling. She was staring toward the entrance with an expression that looked uncomfortably close to dread. Then I saw them. Rebecca's parents, already seated at the head of the table like royalty waiting to grant an audience. The mother, Lorraine, wore an emerald silk dress covered in subtle beading that caught the light with every breath. Diamonds glittered at her throat, her wrists, her ears, her fingers. Her silver hair was swept into an elaborate twist that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Beside her sat Richard, her husband. Charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked painted on. A watch on his wrist thick and heavy enough to be a weapon. His expression was serious, evaluating, the look of a man used to appraising value at a glance. They looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine spread. I walked toward them slowly, taking small uncertain steps like someone afraid of taking up too much space. Daniel saw me first, and his face changed completely. His eyes went wide. He looked me up and down, and I watched him swallow hard. "Mom, you came." His voice sounded strained, almost apologetic. "Of course, sweetheart. Here I am." I smiled timidly, the smile of someone unaccustomed to places like this. Rebecca greeted me with a quick cold kiss on the cheek, mechanical and distant. "Catherine, good to see you." Her eyes said something entirely different. She turned to introduce me to her parents, her tone strange and apologetic, like she was presenting damaged goods. "Mom, Dad, this is Daniel's mother." Lorraine looked up slowly, her gaze traveling from my worn shoes to my frayed bag to my wrinkled dress. I watched judgment crystallize in her eyes instantly. Disappointment, disdain, calculation. She extended one perfectly manicured hand without standing. "A pleasure." Her handshake was limp, cold, dismissive. Richard did the same. Weak grip, forced smile. "Charmed." I sat in the chair at the far end of the table, the seat farthest from them, like a second-class guest at my own son's family gathering. Nobody helped me with my chair. Nobody asked if I needed anything. The waiter arrived with menus thick as novels, printed entirely in French. I opened mine and pretended to struggle with every word. Lorraine watched me with barely concealed amusement. "Do you need help with that?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, please. I don't understand these words." My voice came out small and embarrassed. She sighed like I was a burden she hadn't anticipated. "Something simple then. Something that won't break the bank. We don't want to get carried away." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Richard nodded in agreement. Daniel looked down at his napkin. Rebecca twisted hers in her lap. Nobody said a word in my defense. And I just watched. I watched everything. Lorraine started talking first, easing into conversation with polished skill. The flight over, how exhausting international travel had become, how different everything felt here compared to home. Then slowly, subtly, she began weaving money into every sentence. She mentioned their hotel suite. $1,200 a night, but worth every penny for the view. She mentioned the luxury sedan they'd rented. Obviously, we couldn't drive just anything. She mentioned the boutiques they'd visited that morning. We picked up a few things. Nothing extravagant. Just a few thousand here and there. She spoke while looking directly at me, waiting for a reaction, expecting me to be impressed or intimidated or awed. I just nodded quietly. "How lovely. That sounds wonderful." She continued, her smile sharpening. "You know, Catherine, Richard and I have always been very strategic with money. We worked incredibly hard. We invested wisely. Now we own properties in 4 countries. Richard has several successful businesses, and I oversee our portfolio personally." She paused dramatically. "And you, what exactly do you do?" Her tone was sweet poison. "I work in an office." I answered softly, lowering my gaze. "Just general tasks. Paperwork. Filing. Simple things." Lorraine and Richard exchanged a look loaded with meaning. Ah, administrative work. That's fine. Honest work. All jobs have dignity, don't they? Of course. I nodded. The food arrived on enormous white plates with tiny portions arranged like art. Lorraine cut into her steak with surgical precision. This costs $95, she announced. But quality is worth paying for. You can't just eat anything, can you? I nodded again. You're absolutely right. Daniel tried to redirect the conversation toward his work, some project he was managing. Lorraine cut him off smoothly. Daniel, does your mother live alone? He nodded reluctantly. Yes. She has a small apartment across town. Lorraine looked at me with theatrical pity. That must be so difficult. Living alone at your age without much support. Does your salary cover everything? I felt the trap closing around me. Barely. But I manage. I save where I can. I don't need much. Lorraine sighed dramatically, like she was moved by my tragic circumstances. Oh, Catherine, you're so brave. Truly. I admire women who struggle alone like this. Though, of course, one always wishes they could give their children more. A better start in life. But, well, everyone gives what they can. There it was. The blade hidden inside silk. She was telling me I hadn't been enough for my son. That I'd failed him. That I was a poor, insufficient mother who couldn't provide what he deserved. Rebecca stared at her plate. Daniel clenched his fists under the table. And I smiled softly. Yes, everyone gives what they can. Lorraine pressed forward, energized by my apparent submission. We always made sure Rebecca had the best of everything. Top schools. Travel across 6 continents. For languages by the time she was 16. Now she has an excellent career earning very well. And when she married Daniel, we helped them significantly. We provided $40,000 for the down payment on their house. Paid for a 3-week honeymoon through Europe, another $15,000. Because that's who we are. We believe in supporting our children properly. She looked at me directly, eyes sharp. And you, were you able to help Daniel with anything when they got married? The question floated in the air like a knife. Not much. I replied quietly. I gave what I could. A small gift. Lorraine smiled victoriously. How sweet. Every gesture counts, doesn't it? The amount doesn't matter. It's the thought that's important. And in that exact moment, I felt rage begin to move through me. Not hot rage. Cold rage. Controlled. Like ice spreading through water. I breathed slowly, kept my timid smile in place, and let Lorraine keep talking. Because that's what people like her do. They talk. They inflate themselves. They display their worth like merchandise. And the more they talk, the more they reveal the emptiness underneath. Lorraine swirled expensive red wine in her glass, like she was performing for an audience. This is from a private vineyard in Bordeaux. $250 a bottle. When you understand quality, you don't compromise. Do you drink wine, Catherine? Only on special occasions. I said quietly. And usually the cheapest kind. I don't know much about these things. Lorraine smiled with condescension so thick you could taste it. Oh, don't worry. Not everyone has a trained palate. That comes with experience, with education, with exposure. Richard and I have toured vineyards across Europe, South America, Australia. We're quite knowledgeable. Richard nodded proudly. It's become a passion, something we enjoy. Rebecca is learning as well. She has excellent taste. Inherited it naturally. He looked at Rebecca like she was a prize he'd crafted himself. Rebecca managed a weak smile. Thanks, Dad. Lorraine turned back to me. And you, Catherine, do you have hobbies? Anything you enjoy in your free time? I shrugged slightly. I watch some television. Cook at home. Walk in the park sometimes. Simple things. Lorraine and Richard exchanged another loaded glance. A silent conversation happening in the space between their eyes. How nice. Lorraine said carefully. Simple pleasures have their charm too, of course. Though naturally one always hopes to expand their horizons. To see the world. To grow culturally. But I understand not everyone has those opportunities. I nodded obediently. You're right. Not everyone has those opportunities. The waiter arrived with dessert. Microscopic portions of something that looked more like sculpture than food. Lorraine ordered the most expensive option on the menu. $35 for a piece of cake the size of a quarter. This is extraordinary, she said after her first bite. It has edible gold leaf on top. See those flakes? Only the finest establishments offer details like this. I ate my dessert in silence. Something simpler, cheaper, unremarkable. Lorraine set down her fork and her expression shifted, becoming serious, falsely maternal. You know, Catherine, I think we need to discuss something important as a family. Now that we're all together. She looked around the table. Her face was a mask of concern. Daniel is our son-in-law and we love him dearly. Rebecca loves him. We respect that choice. But as parents, we always want the best for our daughter. Daniel tensed immediately. Mom, this isn't the time. Lorraine raised one hand, like she was stopping traffic. Let me finish, dear. This is important. She turned her attention back to me. Catherine, I understand you did the best you could raising Daniel. I know being a single mother wasn't easy. I truly respect that. But Daniel is at a different stage now. He's married. He has responsibilities. And Rebecca and he deserve stability. Stability, I repeated softly. Yes, Lorraine replied smoothly. Financial stability. Emotional stability. We've helped considerably and will continue to help. But we believe it's important that Daniel doesn't carry unnecessary burdens. Her meaning was crystal clear. She was calling me a burden. His mother. An obstacle. Something weighing him down. Rebecca stared at her plate like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Daniel's jaw was locked tight. Burdens. I said again, letting the word hang. Lorraine sighed like this was difficult for her. I don't want to sound harsh, Catherine. But at your age, living alone on a limited income, it's only natural that Daniel worries about you. That he feels he needs to take care of you. And that's beautiful. He's a good son. But we don't want that concern affecting his marriage. Do you understand? Perfectly. I replied. Lorraine smiled, relieved. I'm glad. That's why we wanted this conversation. She paused for effect. Richard and I have been thinking. We could help you financially. A small monthly allowance. Something to let you live more comfortably, so Daniel doesn't have to worry so much. Obviously, it would be modest. We're not miracle workers. But it would help. I stayed silent, watching her, waiting. She continued, confidence growing. And in exchange, we'd only ask that you respect Daniel and Rebecca's space. Don't reach out quite so often. Don't pressure them. Give them freedom to build their life together without interference. How does that sound? There it was. The offer laid bare. A bribe wrapped in charity. They wanted to pay me to disappear from my son's life. To stop being an embarrassment. To fade quietly into the background, so I wouldn't tarnish their daughter's perfect image with my poverty. Daniel exploded. Mom, stop. You don't need to. Lorraine interrupted him smoothly. Daniel, calm down. We're having an adult conversation. Your mother understands, don't you, Catherine? I picked up my napkin slowly. I wiped my lips. I took a long sip of water. I let the silence expand and fill the space until it became uncomfortable. Everyone stared at me. Lorraine with expectation. Richard with arrogance. Rebecca with shame. Daniel with desperation. Then I spoke. My voice came out completely different. No longer timid. No longer small. It was firm. Clear. Cold as winter steel. That's a very interesting offer, Lorraine. Truly generous of you. Lorraine smiled, thinking she'd won. I'm glad you see it that way. I nodded slowly. But I have a few questions. Just to make sure I understand everything clearly. Lorraine blinked, surprised. Of course. Ask anything. I leaned forward slightly. How much exactly would you consider a modest monthly allowance? Lorraine hesitated. Well, we were thinking around $500. Maybe $700, depending on circumstances. I nodded thoughtfully. I see. $700 a month for me to disappear from my son's life. Lorraine frowned. I wouldn't phrase it quite like that. I cut her off. That's exactly how you phrased it. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Catherine, I don't want you to misunderstand our intentions. Of course. I said evenly. Help. That's what you called it. How generous was your help with the house down payment? How much was that exactly? Lorraine straightened with pride. $40,000. A substantial investment. Ah, $40,000. How incredibly generous. And the honeymoon? $15,000. Lorraine said confidently. 3 weeks across Europe. First class everything. Remarkable. I replied. So you've invested approximately $55,000 in Daniel and Rebecca's future. Lorraine smiled widely. Well, when you love your children, you don't hold back. You're absolutely right. I nodded slowly. When you love your children, you don't hold back. But tell me something, Lorraine. All that investment, all that money, did it buy you anything real? Lorraine blinked, confused. Excuse me? My tone sharpened. Did it buy you respect? Did it buy genuine love? Or did it just buy obedience? The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. Lorraine stopped smiling. What are you saying? You've spent this entire evening talking about money. How much things cost. How much you've spent. How much you have. But you haven't asked me once how I am. If I'm happy. If I need companionship. You've only calculated my value. And apparently I'm worth $700 a month to make me go away. Lorraine went pale. I didn't mean yes you did. I interrupted her. You absolutely did. Since the moment I walked through that door, you've been measuring my worth with your checkbook. And you know what I learned tonight, Lorraine? I learned that people who only talk about money are usually the ones who understand their true value the least. Richard intervened, his voice hard. I think you're misinterpreting my wife's intentions completely. I looked at him directly. Am I? What were her intentions then? To treat me with pity? To humiliate me through every course of this meal? To offer me charity, so I'd vanish like an embarrassment? Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel was frozen. Mom, please, I looked at my son. No, Daniel. I'm done being quiet. I placed my napkin on the table carefully. I leaned back in my chair. There was no more timidity in my posture. No more shrinking. I looked Lorraine directly in the eyes and held her gaze until she looked away, uncomfortable. Something fundamental had shifted, and everyone felt it. Lorraine, you said something interesting earlier. You said you admire women who struggle alone, who are brave. Lorraine nodded cautiously. Yes, I did say that. Then let me ask you something. Have you ever struggled alone? Have you ever built anything with your own hands without your husband's money backing you? Have you ever created something from absolute nothing? Lorraine stammered. I have my own accomplishments, like what? I asked with genuine curiosity. Tell me. Lorraine adjusted her diamond necklace nervously. I manage our investments. I oversee the properties. I make critical decisions in our businesses. I nodded. Businesses your husband built. Properties you bought together. Investments made with money he generated. Am I wrong? Richard interrupted, annoyed. That's not fair. My wife works just as hard as I do. Of course. I replied calmly. I don't doubt she works. But there's a difference between managing wealth that already exists and creating it from nothing. Between overseeing an empire you inherited and building it brick by brick with bleeding hands. Don't you think? Lorraine pressed her lips into a thin line. I don't know where you're going with this. Let me explain. I replied. 40 years ago, I was 23 years old. I was a secretary at a small company earning minimum wage. I lived in a rented room the size of a closet. I ate the cheapest food I could find. And I was completely alone. Daniel stared at me. I'd never told him this story in such detail. I continued, my voice steady. One day I got pregnant. The father disappeared the moment he found out. My family disowned me, called me a disgrace. I had to decide right then whether to keep going or give up. I chose to keep going. I worked until the day I went into labor. I was back at work 2 weeks after Daniel was born. A neighbor watched him during the day while I worked 12-hour shifts. I paused and took a drink of water. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. But I didn't stay a secretary. I studied at night, took courses, learned English at the public library from borrowed books, taught myself accounting, finance, business administration. I became an expert in things nobody ever taught me. All of it on my own. All of it while raising a child alone. All of it while paying for rent, food, medicine, clothes, everything. Lorraine was staring at her plate now. Her arrogance was crumbling. And you know what happened, Lorraine? I climbed. Slowly. From secretary to assistant. Assistant to coordinator. Coordinator to manager. Manager to director. Director to vice president. It took 20 years. 20 years of constant work. Of sacrifices you cannot even begin to imagine. But I did it. And do you know how much I earn now? Lorraine shook her head slowly, her face pale. $40,000 a month. The silence was absolute, like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. Daniel dropped his fork, and it clattered against his plate. Rebecca's eyes went wide as saucers. Richard frowned in disbelief. Lorraine froze completely, her mouth hanging slightly open. $40,000. I repeated clearly. Every single month for the last 19 years. That's nearly $9 million in gross income over my career. Not counting bonuses. Not counting investment returns. Not counting stock options. Lorraine blinked rapidly like her brain was malfunctioning. No, I don't understand. You earn $40,000 every month? That's correct. I replied calmly. I'm a senior vice president of operations for a multinational logistics corporation. I oversee 7 countries. I manage budgets in the hundreds of millions. I make decisions that affect over 12,000 employees. I sign contracts you'd need a team of lawyers just to read. And I do it every single day. Daniel was pale as death. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at him with tenderness. Because you didn't need to know, sweetheart. Because I wanted you to grow up valuing effort, not inheritance. Because I wanted you to become a person, not a trust fund. Because money corrupts and I refused to let it corrupt you. But then Rebecca whispered, her voice shaking. Why do you live in that tiny apartment? Why do you wear those clothes? Why don't you drive a luxury car? I smiled. Because I don't need to impress anyone. Because true wealth doesn't need an audience. Because I learned that the more you actually have, the less you need to prove it. I turned my gaze back to Lorraine. That's why I came dressed like this tonight. That's why I pretended to be poor and desperate. I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought had nothing. I wanted to see your true colors shine through. And believe me, Lorraine, I saw them perfectly. Lorraine was red now. Shame and rage fighting for control of her face. This is absurd. If you earned that much, we would know. Daniel would know. Why would he possibly think you were struggling? Because I let him. I replied simply. Because I never discussed my career. Because I live modestly by choice. Because the money I earn goes into investments and savings, not jewelry and designer handbags and bragging at expensive dinners. Richard cleared his throat roughly. Even so, this doesn't change the fact that you were dishonest. That you manipulated us. Really? I looked at him steadily. I manipulated you when you said I was a burden to Daniel. I manipulated you when you offered me $700 to disappear from his life. I manipulated you with every condescending comment about my clothes, my job, my existence. Richard didn't answer. Neither did Lorraine. I stood up slowly. Everyone's eyes followed me. Let me tell you something nobody has clearly ever told you. Money does not buy class. It does not buy real education. It does not buy empathy or kindness or basic human decency. You have money, perhaps quite a lot of it. But you don't have 1 ounce of what actually matters. Lorraine stood up abruptly, furious. And you do. You who lied to us. Who deceived us. Who made us look like fools. I didn't make you look like fools. I replied coldly. You did that entirely on your own. I simply gave you the opportunity to show who you really are. And you did it magnificently. Rebecca had tears streaming down her face. Catherine, I didn't know. I know. I interrupted gently. You didn't know. But your parents knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they were humiliating me. And they enjoyed every second of it until they discovered the broke woman they scorned has more money than they'll ever see. And now they don't know what to do with that information. Lorraine was trembling. You have no right, I have every right. I replied firmly. Because I'm your son-in-law's mother. Because I deserve respect. Not because of my bank account. Not because of my title. But because I'm a human being. Something you forgot throughout this entire dinner. Daniel stood up. Mom, please. Let's just go. I looked at him. Not yet, sweetheart. I'm not finished. I turned back to Lorraine one final time. You offered to help me with $700 a month. Let me make you a counter-offer. I'll give you $1 million right now, cash, if you can prove to me that you've ever treated someone with kindness who didn't have money or status. Lorraine opened her mouth. Closed it. Said nothing. Exactly. I replied. You can't. Because to you, people are only worth what they have in their bank accounts. And that's the difference between us. I built wealth. You just spend it. I earned respect. You try to buy it. I have dignity. You have credit cards. I picked up my frayed canvas bag. I reached inside and pulled out a black metal credit card. I placed it on the table in front of Lorraine. This is my corporate card. Unlimited limit. Use it to pay for this entire dinner. Leave a generous tip. Consider it a gift from a broke, desperate mother. Lorraine looked at the card like it was a live snake. Black. Heavy. My name engraved in silver letters. Catherine Morrison, Senior Vice President. Her hand trembled when she picked it up. She turned it over, examined it closely, then looked at me. Her eyes had changed. The superiority was gone. Now there was something I never thought I'd see in her. Fear. I don't need your money, she said, her voice breaking. I know. I replied. But I didn't need your pity either. and yet you offered it generously all evening long. So take this as a lesson in courtesy, in good manners. Something you clearly didn't learn despite all those trips through Europe. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This is completely out of control. You're being disrespectful. Respect, I repeated. How interesting that you use that word now. Where was your respect when your wife asked if my salary was enough to survive on? Where was it when she suggested I was weighing Daniel down? Where was it when she tried to buy me off to make me disappear? Richard clenched his jaw. Lorraine was just trying to help. No, I corrected her firmly. Lorraine was trying to control. She wanted to eliminate what she saw as a weak link. The embarrassing poor mother ruining her daughter's perfect image. The problem is she chose the wrong person to target. I looked at Rebecca. Her head was bowed, hands shaking in her lap. Rebecca, I said softly. She looked up, tears flowing freely. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they would. I didn't know my parents. Don't finish that sentence. I interrupted gently. Because you did know. Maybe you didn't know about my money. But you knew how your parents treat people they consider beneath them. And you did nothing to stop it. Rebecca sobbed harder. I wanted to say something. But they're my parents. I know, I replied. And Daniel is my son. But I let him make his own choices. His own life. His own mistakes. Because that's how real love works. With freedom. Not control. Not money. Not manipulation. Daniel came closer to me. Mom, forgive me. Please. For never asking. For assuming. For thinking you were. His voice cracked completely. I hugged him tightly. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. I did what I did for specific reasons. I wanted you to be independent. To value the right things. To build your own life without depending on me financially. But you made me worry. Daniel said quietly. You made me feel like I had to protect you. Like you were fragile. I know. I replied, holding him. And that wasn't wrong. Because that's how you learn compassion. How you learn to care about others. To be empathetic. Those are lessons money can never buy. Daniel hugged me even tighter. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lorraine was still standing rigid, watching us with confusion and contained fury. This doesn't change anything. She finally said. You lied. You deceived us. You came here in bad faith with hidden intentions. True. I nodded. I did exactly that. I pretended to be something I'm not. Exactly what you do every single day. What's that supposed to mean? Richard demanded. It means you hide behind your money. Behind your jewelry and your trips and everything you can buy. But inside you're hollow. You don't have depth. You don't have substance. You have nothing to offer beyond a bank balance. Lorraine gave a sharp, bitter laugh. Coming from someone who lied all night, that's pure hypocrisy. Perhaps, I replied, but my lie exposed truth. Your truth. And now you can't hide from it. Now you know I saw you. I felt every insult disguised as concern. And I'll never forget it. The waiter approached timidly. Excuse me, would anyone like anything else? Richard shook his head sharply. Just the check. The waiter nodded and disappeared quickly. Lorraine sat back down heavily, defeated. Her posture was no longer elegant. It was the posture of someone who'd just lost something crucial. Not money. Power. Catherine, she said in a softer voice, less aggressive. I don't want this to destroy the relationship between our families. Daniel and Rebecca love each other. They have a life together. We can't let this. I interrupted her. Let this what? Let this ruin your plans? Let this expose what you really think. It's too late, Lorraine. The damage is done. But we can fix it. She insisted desperately. We can start over. Start fresh. No, I said firmly. We can't. Because now I know exactly who you are. And you know exactly who I am. And that truth can't be erased with fake apologies or empty smiles. You treated me like garbage. And you did it with pleasure, because you thought you could get away with it. Richard cleared his throat. You provoked this entire situation. You lied from the beginning. You're right. I nodded. I did provoke it. Because I needed to know. I needed to confirm what I already suspected. That you're not good people. That your money doesn't make you better than anyone. That you're exactly the kind of people who despise others for not having the same advantages. Lorraine wiped a tear from her eye. We're not bad people. Maybe not. I replied. But you're definitely not good. And there's an enormous difference between those two things. The waiter returned with the leather check holder and placed it in the center of the table. Nobody touched it. Lorraine looked at my black corporate card still in her hands, then looked at me. I'm not using your card, she said quietly. We'll pay our own bill like we always do. Perfect, I replied. Then keep that card as a souvenir, as a reminder that things aren't always what they seem, that the woman you scorned all evening has more than you'll ever accumulate. And I'm not talking about money. Lorraine set the card down on the table carefully. I don't want it. I don't want your moral lecture either. I pushed it back toward her. Keep it anyway, because something tells me you'll need the reminder. Someday you'll meet someone else like me, someone pretending to be less than they are, and you'll make the same mistake again, because people like you never learn. Richard pulled out his wallet, extracted several gold credit cards, all shiny and impressive. He selected one and placed it on the check with forced confidence. The waiter took it and disappeared. Nobody spoke during those agonizing minutes of waiting. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, suffocating. Rebecca cried quietly into her napkin. Daniel held my hand tightly. Lorraine stared at the wall like she was in shock. Richard checked his phone obsessively to avoid making eye contact with anyone. The waiter returned, his expression apologetic. Sir, I'm sorry. Your card was declined. Richard's head snapped up. What? That's impossible. The waiter repeated carefully. Declined. Do you have another form of payment? Richard's face turned deep red. That card has a credit limit higher than most people's mortgages. This must be a system error. The waiter shrugged politely. I can try again if you'd like. Richard handed him a different card, this one platinum. The waiter left again. Lorraine looked at her husband nervously. What's happening? I don't know. Richard replied, irritated. Probably a security freeze because we're traveling internationally. It happens sometimes with foreign transactions. I nodded with false sympathy. Of course. These things happen. How inconvenient. The waiter returned a second time, looking even more uncomfortable. I'm very sorry, sir. This one was also declined. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. This is ridiculous. I'm calling the bank immediately. He stormed out of the restaurant, phone already at his ear. Lorraine remained seated, humiliation painted across her face. This has never happened to us. She murmured. Never in our lives. What terrible timing. I commented without emotion. Daniel looked at the check sitting on the table. Mom, I can pay for no. I interrupted him gently. You're not paying for anything tonight. I took out my wallet. Simple. Old. Leather cracked from decades of use. I pulled out another card. This one wasn't black. It wasn't even plastic. It was transparent, made of heavy metal, with a weight you could feel. A card less than 1% of people in the world possess. I placed it on the table in front of Lorraine. She looked at it, and her eyes went impossibly wide. She knew exactly what it was. That's a Centurion card. She whispered. That's right. I replied calmly. American Express invitation only. Minimum annual spending requirement of $250,000. Annual fee of $7,500, just for the privilege of carrying it. Benefits you couldn't imagine in your wildest dreams. Lorraine said nothing. She just stared. The waiter picked up the card carefully, reverently, like it was something sacred. He returned in less than 2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Everything is settled. The total was $847. Would you like the receipt? Not necessary. I replied. The waiter nodded respectfully and left. Lorraine continued staring at the empty space where the card had been, her face drained of all color. I stood up, gathered my worn wallet and my frayed canvas bag, and looked at Lorraine one final time. The dinner was excellent. Thank you for recommending this place. And thank you for showing me exactly who you are. You saved me years of wondering, years of wasted energy, years of future disappointments. Lorraine finally looked up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from tears but from contained rage burning underneath humiliation. This doesn't end here, she said, her voice shaking. You can't just humiliate us and walk away like nothing happened. Rebecca is our daughter. Daniel is our son-in-law. We're still family. You'll have to see us again. You're absolutely right. I smiled coldly. I will see you at birthdays and holidays and family gatherings. But now I'll see you differently. I won't wonder anymore what you think of me. I know exactly what you think. And you know that I know. And you'll live with that knowledge. Every time you see me, every time you force a polite smile, you'll remember tonight. You'll remember how you treated me. And how spectacularly wrong you were. Richard returned to the table, his phone still in his hand, his face ashen. There's an issue with the accounts, he said quietly. A temporary security block. It'll be resolved by tomorrow morning. He looked at the empty table. Did someone already pay? Yes. Lorraine replied without looking at him. She paid. Richard looked at me. His pride shattered into pieces at his feet. Thank you, he murmured, barely audible. You're welcome, I replied evenly. That's what family does, isn't it? We help each other, especially when someone needs a modest allowance. Say $700. Or in this case, $847 for dinner. Richard closed his eyes. Lorraine clenched her fists so hard her knuckles went white. Daniel touched my arm gently. Mom, let's go. Please. You're right, I said. It's more than enough. I turned to Rebecca one last time. She was still crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. Rebecca, I said softly. She raised her head slowly. You're not responsible for how your parents behave. Nobody chooses their family. But you do choose how you act, how you treat people, how you'll raise your own children someday. Remember that. Rebecca nodded through her tears, unable to speak. Don't apologize again. I told her. Just learn. Learn that money doesn't define human worth. That humility isn't weakness. That respecting others costs absolutely nothing. And if you have children someday, teach them to see people's hearts, not their bank statements. Rebecca sobbed harder. Daniel put his arm around her. Lorraine looked away, jaw clenched. Richard stared at his phone, avoiding everyone's eyes. I walked toward the exit with my head high. I took several steps, then stopped and turned around one final time. Oh, Lorraine. One more thing. She looked at me, eyes filled with venom. You mentioned earlier that you speak 4 languages fluently. Lorraine frowned, confused. What does that have to do with anything? I'm just curious. I replied. In which of those 4 languages did you learn to be kind? Because clearly it wasn't in any of them. Lorraine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Exactly. I said. You can speak 100 languages and still have nothing worth saying. I walked out of that restaurant into the cool night air. Daniel walked beside me in stunned silence. The fresh air hit my face, and I breathed deeply, feeling like an enormous weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Not a physical weight, an emotional one. The weight of pretending, of tolerating, of staying silent. Marcus took my arm gently. Mom, are you okay? I'm perfectly fine, I replied. Better than I've been in years. And you? Are you okay? Daniel exhaled slowly. I don't know. I'm still processing everything. I can't believe you never told me about your career, about your salary, about everything you accomplished. I stopped walking and looked him in the eyes. Does it bother you that I kept it from you? He shook his head quickly. No, not at all. I'm incredibly proud. I just feel foolish. Blind. You're not foolish. I told him firmly. You saw exactly what I wanted you to see. And I did it deliberately because I needed you to grow up independent, without a safety net, without feeling entitled. I needed you to fight for what you wanted, to value your own accomplishments, not to coast on mine. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand now. But I also understand why you never complained, why you never asked for help, why you always seemed so calm. Because you never needed anything. I smiled. I needed many things, sweetheart. Just none of them could be bought with money. I needed to watch you grow up, to see you become a good man, to see you make right choices. And I got all of that. Even marrying Rebecca? He asked, his voice weak. Even marrying Rebecca. I replied. She's not her parents. She can learn. She can change. But that depends on her. And on you. On how you build your relationship together. On what values you choose to follow. Daniel was quiet, processing. A rideshare pulled up that I'd called as we left. I opened the door. Daniel stopped me. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do it? Why did you come pretending to be poor? Why not just tell them the truth from the beginning? I closed the car door and turned to face him. Because I needed to know Daniel. I needed to confirm whether my suspicions were correct. Whether Rebecca's family was really what I thought they were. And unfortunately, I was completely right. Daniel lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. You don't apologize for them. I told him. But you do need to decide what kind of husband you want to be. What kind of father you want to be someday. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, you just witnessed 2 very different approaches to money and power. Your in-laws' way and mine. They use it to control, to humiliate, to feel superior. I use it for freedom, to help quietly, to live peacefully. You decide which path you want to follow. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding. I know which one I choose. Good. I opened the car door again and climbed in. I rolled down the window. Daniel leaned closer. Mom, one last question. Go ahead. Will you ever forgive Lorraine and Richard? I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean allowing it to happen again. I might forgive them eventually, when I see real change, when they start treating people as human beings, not as numbers on a balance sheet. But until then, I'll be polite, distant, and extremely cautious. And me? Daniel asked quietly. Do you forgive me for not asking? For assuming? For letting this dinner happen? I looked at him with all the love I had. Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was right. You wanted your family to meet. That's beautiful. What happened after wasn't your fault. It was theirs. And partially mine, because I chose to play their game. Marcus smiled weakly. You won that game. I won. I agreed. But I don't feel victorious. I feel tired. And sad. Because I confirmed something I didn't want to confirm. That some people never change. That some families are broken even when they're wealthy. That there are voids no amount of money can fill. The driver cleared his throat politely. Ma'am, should we head out? Yes. I replied. One moment. I looked at Daniel one final time. Go back to Rebecca. Talk to her. Listen to her. Support her. But also be honest. Tell her how you felt tonight. Tell her what you expect from her family. From her. Because if you don't establish boundaries now, this will happen over and over again. I will. Daniel promised. I love you, Mom. I mean that more than ever. Because now I know who you really are. And you're incredible. I smiled, tears forming in my eyes. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have. Always will. Regardless of how much money I have or don't have. Because love doesn't have a price tag. That's a lesson Lorraine and Richard will never understand. Daniel stepped back from the car. I signaled the driver. We can go now. The car pulled away from the curb. I watched through the rear window as Daniel walked back toward the restaurant, shoulders hunched deep in thought. He was probably going back to Rebecca, to face his in-laws, to have difficult conversations. And I felt proud, because that meant he was growing, learning, choosing to be better than the example he'd just witnessed. The car moved through the city's illuminated streets. I closed my eyes and let the events of the evening wash over me. Every word, every look, every moment of tension. And I wondered if I'd done the right thing, if I'd been too harsh, too cruel, too calculated. But then I remembered every disguised insult, every condescending smile, every look of disdain, and I knew I hadn't been too anything. I'd simply been honest. Finally, the driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Excuse me for asking, ma'am. Everything all right back there? I opened my eyes. Yes, everything's fine. Why do you ask? Well, you got in pretty quiet. And normally folks coming out of that restaurant are all happy, talking about the food. You look like you just came from a battle. I smiled slightly. Something like that. Was it that obvious? He shrugged. I've been driving for 23 years. I've seen everything. Drunk people, people fighting, couples breaking up, families arguing. And you've got that look. That look someone gets when they finally said something they've been holding inside for years. You're very perceptive. I told him. It's part of the job. He replied. Plus it helps pass the time. Want to talk about it? You don't have to. But sometimes it helps to tell a stranger. Someone who won't judge. Someone who doesn't know you. I considered his offer. It was tempting. But I shook my head. Thank you. But I think I've talked enough for one night. He nodded understandingly. Fair enough. But let me tell you something. Whatever happened in there, you did the right thing. I can tell because you're calm. You're not crying. You're not screaming. You're processing. And that means you spoke your truth. And the truth always brings peace, even when it hurts. His words surprised me. He was older, maybe 65, with gray hair and working hands. A simple man. Someone like I'd pretended to be. Do you believe in truth? I asked him. I believe in honesty. He replied. Not always absolute truth, because truth changes depending on who tells it. But honesty doesn't shift. Honesty is saying what you feel without masks, without lies, even if it hurts, even if it costs you something. You're right, I murmured. My wife used to tell me I was too direct. He continued, that I said things without filters, that I hurt people without meaning to. Maybe she was right, but she also told me she never doubted me, because she knew what came out of my mouth was real. Not calculated. Not manipulated. Just real. I smiled genuinely. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. He replied quietly. She died 6 years ago. I'm sorry. I said sincerely. Don't be. He shook his head. We had 42 years together. 42 years of honesty. Of fights. Of reconciliations. Of laughter and tears. And not once did I go to bed wondering what she really thought. Because she always said it. And so did I. That's a rare gift. You're absolutely right. I murmured. It's a gift. The car stopped at a red light. Can I ask you something personal? He asked. Go ahead. Are you rich? The question caught me off guard. Not the question itself, but the directness. Why do you ask? Because I picked you up from a restaurant where dinner costs $1,000 per person. But you dress like someone who shops at discount stores. You carry an old bag. Worn shoes. But you talk like an executive. You move like someone with power. And you paid my fare with crisp bills from a wallet that looks 30 years old. Very observant. I commented. Part of the job. He repeated. So are you? It depends how you define rich. I replied. If you mean money, yes. I have enough. More than enough. If you mean happiness, I also have that. Peace. Health. A son I love deeply. Work I'm passionate about. That makes me rich in many ways. He nodded, satisfied. I knew it. Truly rich people don't need to prove anything. The light changed. The car moved forward. And what happened at that restaurant? He asked. If it's not too personal. I pretended to be poor. I replied simply. To see how they'd treat me. He let out a loud, genuine laugh. Seriously? That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And how did they treat you? Like garbage. I said without emotion. They humiliated me. Offered me charity. Treated me like I was invisible. Less than human. He stopped laughing immediately. I'm sorry. That must have hurt. A little. I admitted. But it also confirmed what I needed to know. That I was right about them. That they weren't worth my time or respect. And now they know exactly who I am. And they'll have to live with that shame forever. The driver whistled softly. That must have been epic to watch. It was. I smiled. It definitely was. We arrived at my building. An older mid-rise in a working-class neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Nothing impressive. But comfortable. Safe. Home. The driver parked and looked at the building with surprise. You live here? I do. I confirmed. He shook his head in amazement. You really are something special. Most people with money move to expensive neighborhoods. Buildings with doormen and security and gyms and pools. You live like a normal person. I am a normal person. I replied. I just happen to have more money than most. But that doesn't make me different. Doesn't make me better. Money is just a tool. Not an identity. He smiled warmly. I wish more people thought like you do. The world would be a lot better. I pulled out my wallet. How much do I owe you? $32. He replied. I handed him a $100 bill. Keep the change. Ma'am, this is way too much. It's not. I said firmly. You listened to me. You gave me perspective. You reminded me there are still genuinely good people in this world. That's worth far more than $68. He took the bill carefully, gratefully. Thank you. Truly. Thank you so much. No. Thank you. I replied. And hold on to that honesty you talked about. It's rare. It's valuable. Don't ever lose it. I won't. He promised. I stepped out of the car and closed the door gently. He rolled down the window. Ma'am, one last thing. Yes. Whatever happened tonight, don't regret it. Don't feel guilty. Because people like you, people who speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, you're the ones who change the world. Little by little. One conversation at a time. I smiled genuinely. Thank you. I'll remember that. The car pulled away into the night. I stood in front of my building, looking up at my 5th-floor window. The light was off. Dark. Silent. Waiting. I entered through the old lobby and climbed the stairs slowly. I never used the elevator. Preferred the exercise. Preferred the quiet routine. I reached my door, pulled out my keys, the same keys I'd carried for 17 years, and unlocked it. The apartment was cold and still. I flipped on the light. Everything exactly as I'd left it. The simple living room. The small kitchen. The mismatched dining chairs. The walls without expensive art. And I felt complete peace. Because this space was genuinely mine. Not bought to impress anyone. Not decorated to show off. Simply a place where I could be myself without pretense, without masks. I took off my worn shoes, peeled off the wrinkled beige dress, and changed into soft, comfortable pajamas. Old, familiar, perfect. I made myself tea, sat on the sofa, and turned on the television. News. Nothing interesting. I turned it off. I sat in silence, thinking, processing, feeling. And for the first time in many years, I felt completely free. Free from pretending. Free from silence. Free from tolerating disrespect. Free from being less than I was. Because that night I hadn't just exposed Lorraine and Richard. I'd also liberated myself. From expectations. From judgment. From the exhausting need to hide who I was. And that liberation was priceless. Worth more than any number in my bank account. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Mom, did you get home safely?" I smiled and typed quickly. "Yes, sweetheart. Home and resting." His response came immediately. "I love you. Thank you for everything. For being who you are. For teaching me. For never giving up on me." I closed my eyes and felt a tear slide down my cheek. Not from sadness. From relief. From love. From gratitude. I replied simply, "I love you too. Always." I set the phone aside, finished my tea, and looked around my modest apartment. My sanctuary. My truth. And I smiled. Because at the end of everything, it didn't matter how much money I had. It didn't matter how high I'd climbed professionally. The only thing that truly mattered was this. This moment. This peace. This absolute honesty with myself. And that was worth more than anything Lorraine and Richard could ever buy. 3 days passed before Rebecca knocked on my door. 3 days of silence and processing and reflection. When I heard the doorbell ring that Wednesday afternoon, I knew exactly who it was. I opened the door slowly. There she stood. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Dressed in jeans and a plain sweatshirt. No jewelry. No heels. She looked vulnerable. Real. Completely different from the polished woman I'd seen at the restaurant. "Catherine," she said quietly. "May I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She entered carefully, looking around, observing my apartment with new eyes. The worn furniture. The simple decorations. The life I'd chosen. She sat on the sofa when I gestured to it. I sat across from her in my old armchair, waiting, not pressuring, letting her find her words in her own time. "I don't know where to start," she finally said. "Start wherever you're ready," I replied gently. She took a shaky breath. "I came to apologize. But not just with empty words. I came to explain why my parents are the way they are, and why I stayed silent for so long." I listened without interrupting. Rebecca continued, her voice trembling. "My parents grew up desperately poor in a small village overseas. No electricity. No running water. Working in fields since they were 6 years old. They watched their own parents die young because they couldn't afford medicine. They went hungry. They suffered in ways I can't imagine. And they promised themselves they'd never be poor again, that they'd do whatever it took to escape." I nodded slowly. "I understand. That explains quite a lot. They worked like animals." Rebecca continued. "Saved every penny. Immigrated looking for opportunities. Richard built his business literally from nothing, from absolute zero. And when they finally started earning money, they never forgot what it felt like not to have it. That's why they talk about it constantly. Why they measure everything by that standard. Because to them, money equals survival. Security. It means never going back to that dark place. It's understandable," I said quietly. "Trauma does strange things to people." Rebecca nodded, tears forming. "But that doesn't excuse how they treated you. I know that. And I need you to know I saw everything. Every comment. Every look. Every insult. And I stayed silent because I've done that my whole life. Stayed quiet. Accepted everything. Let them control me. Because they taught me that contradicting them meant betrayal. That it meant being ungrateful. And now," I asked softly, "now I understand I was wrong." She replied, wiping her eyes. "That love isn't control. That family isn't blind obedience. That I can love them and still disagree with them. Daniel helped me see it. And you helped me see it. That night when you revealed yourself, when you told them everything, it was like a blindfold was ripped off. I always knew something was wrong. I always felt their way of measuring people was incorrect. But I convinced myself it was me. That I was too sensitive. That I didn't understand how the world worked. But you showed me there's another way to live. A way where money doesn't define worth. where humility is strength, where authenticity is true wealth. Rebecca, I said gently, I didn't come that night to change you. I came to protect myself, to know who I was dealing with. I know, she replied quickly, and I thank you for that brutal honesty, because it saved me. It saved me from becoming my mother, from continuing that cycle, from teaching my future children that people's value comes from their bank accounts. I don't want that. I refuse to be that. And your parents? I asked carefully. How are they handling all this? Rebecca sighed deeply. Furious. Hurt. Humiliated. My mother hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. My father sent a message saying I disappointed him, that I chose strangers over my own blood, that I'll regret this decision someday. She paused. And you know what's strange? I don't feel bad about it. I feel free. That's good. I said. It means you made the right choice. Rebecca nodded firmly. Daniel and I set boundaries. We told them they can be part of our lives, but only if they respect us, respect our decisions, stop trying to control us with money or emotional blackmail. And if they can't do that, they'll have to accept a distant relationship. How did they respond? I asked. Badly. Rebecca replied. My mother said we were ungrateful, that they'd sacrificed everything for me. My father threatened to disinherit me, to cut off all financial support, as if that's the only thing holding our relationship together, as if our love for them depends on their money. And that's when I realized they genuinely believe that. They truly think their value is in their wallet. It's deeply sad. I commented. Very sad. Rebecca agreed. Because they have so much but enjoy nothing. They just accumulate, compete, show off. But they never stop to ask if they're actually happy, if they have peace, if they have real connections. They just count their properties and feel victorious while inside they're completely empty. She was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at me. Catherine, I want to ask something from you. Tell me. I want to learn from you. I want you to teach me how to live with dignity, how to be wealthy without needing to prove it, how to have peace in chaos, how to be strong without being cruel. Because that night I saw something in you I've never seen in my parents. I saw real class, real power, a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. I smiled gently. Rebecca, I can't teach you that. It's learned by living, by making mistakes, by falling and getting back up. The only thing I can do is share my experience and tell you the path isn't easy. You'll face criticism, judgment, people who won't understand why you live differently. But if you stay true to yourself, if you live according to your values, you'll find peace. And that peace is worth more than any amount of money could ever buy. I want to try, Rebecca said with determination. I want to be better, not just for Daniel, but for myself, because I deserve to live without constant pressure, without needing to impress people, without fear of not being enough. Then do it, I told her firmly. But don't try to change everything overnight. Do it gradually. Start by questioning your habits, your purchases, your motivations. Ask yourself before every decision, is this for me or for others? Does this bring me peace or just appearance? Rebecca nodded, absorbing every word. And my parents, do you think they'll ever change? I looked at her with complete honesty. I don't know. Real change requires recognizing you have a problem. And they don't believe they have one. They believe the world is wrong, that people are ungrateful, that they're victims, until they see that change isn't possible. But you can change. You can break the cycle. I will, she promised, with Daniel's help, and hopefully with your guidance too. You don't need my guidance, I replied. You just need your internal compass. That voice inside telling you what's right and wrong. That voice you silenced for years to please your parents. Listen to it now. Trust it. Follow it. Rebecca wiped away her final tears. Thank you, Catherine, for everything, for your patience, your honesty, for not giving up on us. There's nothing to thank me for, I said warmly. Just promise me one thing. When you have children someday, teach them the value of people, not their price. Teach them empathy, humility, kindness, things that cost nothing but are worth everything. I promise, Rebecca said with absolute conviction. I promise with all my heart. We hugged then. A real, warm, honest embrace. No pretense. No masks. Just two women connecting as human beings. Rebecca left an hour later, visibly lighter, freer, with genuine hope in her eyes. I closed the door behind her and sat back on my sofa. I looked around my simple apartment and smiled. Because this was enough. This was everything. An honest space. An authentic life. Real relationships built on truth. I didn't need anything more. I never needed more. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Mom, Rebecca told me about her visit. Thank you for welcoming her. For listening. For giving her a chance. I love you more than words can express. I replied simply. I love you too, sweetheart. Always. I set the phone aside and sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And in that perfect moment, I understood something fundamental. Real wealth isn't measured by what you have. It's measured by how much you enjoy what you have, how much peace you feel, how many genuine people surround you, how many times you can look in the mirror and feel proud of who you are. Lorraine and Richard had millions in the bank. But I had this tranquility, this authenticity, this pure, uncomplicated love for my son. And that made me infinitely richer than they would ever be. I never pretended to be poor again. I didn't need to. I'd learned what I needed to learn. I'd seen what I needed to see. And I'd freed what needed to be freed. Lorraine and Richard continued being exactly who they were. Rich in money, desperately poor in spirit. But that was no longer my concern. No longer my problem. I had spoken my truth. Set my boundaries. Protected my peace. And for the first time in decades, I didn't have to pretend to be anyone other than who I was. I was simply Catherine. Mother. Executive. Woman. Survivor. Fighter. Rich in every sense that truly mattered. And that was more than enough. It was absolutely everything.